She'll forget everything soon. I was standing in the hallway, holding an empty mug, when I heard my son say that. His voice was calm, as if he were talking about the weather. He didn't know I was just on the other side of the wall, a step away, barely breathing. She won't even remember we had this conversation, he added, quieter this time. And then his wife, Charlotte, responded, almost laughing. Well, let's just hope it happens before Christmas. It'll save us all the trouble. I didn't drop the mug. I didn't cry. I just turned around, walked back to my room, and closed the door with both hands. The latch clicked louder than usual. My fingers wouldn't stop trembling. I had no memory problems, thank you very much. I might be 74 and stiff in the knees, but I remembered things just fine, more than they thought, more than they ever knew. The room was cold, though the radiator hissed and clinked behind me. My tea had long gone cold. I sat down on the edge of the bed, that narrow bed they'd bought for me when I moved in, the one that creaked like a guilty whisper every time I turned. Forget, as if I hadn't already spent the last 10 years letting things go. My husband's coat still hung in the closet in plastic wrap. I hadn't had the heart to donate it. My mother's necklace was in a drawer, untouched, because Charlotte had once said it looked old-fashioned. I used to wear it every Sunday. I used to wear lipstick, too. Now I couldn't remember the last time I did either. But I remembered other things. I remembered that Charlotte didn't want me living here in the first place. I remembered how Brian swore it would be temporary, just while we all figure things out. That was 3 years ago. Since then, they turned my temporary room into a storage corner with a bed. They stopped including me in weekend plans. I was asked, no, told, to knock before coming into the kitchen after 7. So, the kids don't get overstimulated, Charlotte had said, as if I was some kind of threat to the peace. Forget. I remembered every utility bill I'd paid in silence, every grocery run I made when their fridge was empty. I remembered giving Brian part of my retirement to help with the down payment on this very house. He cried, said he'd pay me back. He never did. I never asked. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the lights from the neighbor's porch blink off one by one. The moon was thin and pale. Like me, it looked tired. My hands stayed clenched most of the night, not out of rage, but from something colder, something more permanent. I hadn't said a word at dinner. No one noticed. They were talking about school schedules and Charlotte's new business pitch. Brian didn't look at me once. He used to tell people I was the strongest woman he knew. He used to bring me wildflowers from the field behind our old house. She'll forget everything soon. No, sweetheart, I won't. I remember it all. And tonight, I'll write it down. Every last word of it. In ink. That evening, while the house was quiet and Charlotte's laughter echoed softly from the other room, a laugh I now realized I'd always disliked, I took out my legal folder from the bottom drawer of my nightstand, the one I'd kept untouched since Robert passed away. Inside was the copy of my will, typed neatly, signed 5 years ago. Everything to Brian. Of course. Who else would I give it to? I took out a pen. Not the blue one I used for shopping lists. The black one. The one that bled a little at the tip. The one I used for things that mattered. And I began to write. A new will, a new order, a new chapter. Because I may be old, but I'm not gone. Not yet. They stopped knocking. That's when I noticed the shift. At first, it was small things. Charlotte would open my door without asking, just to check if you're awake. Then Brian began walking in while I was getting dressed, acting surprised, as if it was my fault I hadn't locked the door. I should have said something, but I was raised to be polite, to avoid trouble, to never make a fuss. One afternoon, I found Charlotte folding laundry in my room, my underwear in her hands, my stockings dangling over her wrist like forgotten decorations. "I thought I'd help you organize," she smiled, but her eyes weren't smiling. They were scanning, judging, taking inventory. I said thank you. I always said thank you, like a habit I couldn't break, even when it felt like biting into a dry biscuit with no tea. And slowly, invisibly, the borders of my life began to shrink. My bookshelf was moved out to make space. My kettle was taken, because it's safer to use the main kitchen. My chair, the old one Robert bought me when I turned 60, was replaced with a smaller, flatter one that fit better with the house's design. Bit by bit, my space was reduced to the essentials. One bed, one table, one chair, one window. But dignity doesn't take up much space. I tried to remind myself that families change, that people get busy, that maybe I was overreacting. I told myself this every morning when I made my own breakfast in silence, every evening when I waited for someone to ask me how my day had been. No one did. Brian still called me Mom, but only when the kids were listening. Otherwise, it was just her bedroom lights still on, or she left her teacup in the sink again. Charlotte didn't use my name at all. She spoke around me, through me, and the children, sweet as they were, began to mimic the rhythm of their parents. They'd knock once on my door, then run off giggling. They used to come in to show me drawings or sit in my lap while I read them stories. Not anymore. Now, Charlotte said too much time with me made them clingy. I wasn't angry. Not then. Not exactly. I was disappearing. And I noticed it like a person notices autumn. One leaf, then another, then a chill in the air that tells you it's never going back to how it was. I still cooked. Still offered to help with groceries. Still left envelopes with a few dollars for the children's school trips. I never heard thank you. I didn't expect it anymore. What I began to fear most wasn't being forgotten. It was being remembered as a nuisance. One night, Brian came in, didn't knock, and asked if I'd mind skipping dinner with them. "Just for tonight," he said. "Charlotte's hosting some colleagues, and we need the kitchen to look tidy." I nodded. Of course. I didn't ask what wasn't tidy about me. I stayed in my room, ate crackers with soft cheese, and listened to the hum of voices and clinking glasses beyond the door. Someone laughed. Then someone else. My own laughter, I realized, had gone quiet for a long time now. After they cleaned up and went to bed, I washed my plate and cup. I scrubbed the sink, wiped the counters, arranged the chairs. My body ached, but I needed the silence to feel like something had been done right that day. That night, I dreamed I was back in our old home, the one Robert and I built when Brian was small. In the dream, I walked from room to room, and every object called out to me. "Louise," it whispered. "Louise. Louise." That was the last time I heard my name spoken with kindness. I didn't move in because I was weak. I moved in because they said it would be easier. After Robert died, the house became too quiet. Not in the peaceful way, in the hollow way, like a church long after everyone's gone home. I tried to keep it alive. I kept making coffee for two. I kept folding the second pillowcase. I kept setting the table on his side too, until it started to feel like I was setting it for a ghost. Then the pipes froze one winter. Then the roof leaked. Then I slipped on the porch steps and didn't tell anyone. That was the first time I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't live alone. Brian had offered before. "Just come stay with us, Mom. We'll build you a little guest suite. You won't be in the way." He'd said it warmly back then, with a squeeze of my shoulder. I remember his eyes, not yet dulled by that calculation I'd later learned to recognize. Charlotte wasn't thrilled. She smiled too wide and said, "Of course, if that's what you want. Just for a while, right?" But Brian insisted, said it would make him feel better knowing I was safe, said the kids would love having Grandma nearby. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did. I sold the house. 42 years of life packed into boxes, Robert's tools, my cookbooks with handwritten notes in the margins, our wedding photo, the one where my hair was pinned high and he couldn't stop smiling. I gave away most of the furniture, told myself I didn't need much anymore. You're downsizing, Louise. You're being smart. I put most of the money aside, then gave Brian the rest. Just enough to help with renovations, I said. To build the suite. I want to contribute. He didn't argue, just hugged me tight, and I felt like maybe I'd finally done something good. The first few months weren't so bad. The room was small, but warm. Charlotte cooked nice meals, and the kids still burst in to hug me. Brian asked about my day, and sometimes we even watched the evening news together. It felt like family, but only for a little while. Soon, the suite turned into a utility room with a bed. The guest bathroom was used to store cleaning supplies. My space, the one I'd helped pay for, became something to apologize for. "It's just temporary," Charlotte said once, when she wanted to store extra crates from her home business in the corner of my room. "You don't mind, right? It's not like you use the whole space anyway." I minded, I just didn't say it. What I remember most clearly is the slow erosion. Not the big changes, but the 1,000 little ones that told me I wasn't part of their world, only adjacent to it. Like the day Charlotte installed that lock on the fridge for the kids' snacks, or when Brian moved the mail to a new basket that I couldn't reach without standing on my toes, or when I realized no one ever said goodnight anymore. And yet, I stayed. Because where else would I go? Because leaving would mean starting over. Because I still wanted to believe that deep down, they cared. When Robert was alive, he used to say, "You don't measure love by words, Lou. You measure it by who shows up when it's inconvenient." No one showed up for me. But I kept showing up for them. I never told Brian about the arthritis getting worse. Never mentioned how hard it was to carry laundry up the stairs. Never admitted that the dizziness had returned, the kind that makes the walls tilt ever so slightly when I move too fast. Instead, I folded. I adapted. I gave more. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? Even when no one's asking them to. Even when they've stopped being thanked. They called it the Nook, as if it were some charming little corner in a cozy cottage. It was a converted mudroom, really, barely 8 feet by 10, wedged between the laundry area and the side entrance. No window unless you count the narrow, frosted glass in the door. In winter, the draft slipped through the baseboard like a whisper, but it had a bed, and a lamp, and a thin dresser they said I could use for the essentials. I never asked why the guest room upstairs had become a home office instead. I already knew the answer. Charlotte liked to call it your little space. Brian called it temporary. The children just called it Grandma's room, and avoided it like a closet that smells too much like mothballs and old paper. At first, I tried to make it mine. I put up a photo of Robert, the one where he's holding a fishing pole and grinning like a boy. I placed a doily on the dresser, one of the few things I'd managed to bring from the old house. I even bought a small plant, a green pothos in a ceramic pot with a chip on the rim. It died within 2 weeks. No light, no air. That should have told me something. Charlotte eventually asked me not to keep food in my room. It attracts ants, she said. I'd started storing a few crackers and tea bags in my drawer after being told, gently, always gently, that I should give the kitchen space when Charlotte was meal prepping. She didn't like being watched, she said it made her anxious, as if my presence was a judgment, as if my hands, folded quietly on the table, were an intrusion. I stopped entering the kitchen after 6 p.m., not because I agreed, but because I was tired of the silence that followed me when I did. Tired of pretending I didn't notice the side glances, the sudden drop in conversation when I walked in. One evening, I overheard Brian say, "She's always hovering." I wanted to laugh. Hovering implies you're still seen. I began to eat most meals alone, a sandwich in my room, tea in a mug that had lost its handle, cold cereal for dinner. And still, I washed the dishes after their meals, cleaned the counter, wiped the little handprints off the fridge. There's a kind of loneliness that's worse than being alone. It's being invisible in the company of people you love. The only place I still felt like myself was the porch. I'd go out early, before the house stirred, and sit on the creaking swing Robert once repaired with his own hands. The sun would rise behind the neighbor's oak tree, and for those brief minutes, I could pretend I was just an old woman enjoying the morning air, not one exiled from her own family. Then one Saturday, I found the porch door locked. "Just for security," Charlotte explained when I asked. "We're trying to make sure the kids don't wander out without us knowing." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The message was clear. The next morning, Brian installed a keypad. "For everyone's safety," he said. "We'll give you the code, of course." He never did. Usefulness can become a disease. I didn't realize that until much later. Until I noticed how quickly I offered my hands, my time, my strength, even when no one asked. Especially when no one asked. It started small. A basket of laundry here, a pot of soup there, a little help with school pickups when Charlotte was swamped. I wanted to feel needed. That's the truth of it. After Robert died, the silence in my days felt like a sinkhole. Helping them filled the hours, gave shape to the evenings, gave purpose to mornings that otherwise blurred into one another. At first, they were grateful, or they pretended to be. Charlotte would say, "Thanks, Louise, you're a lifesaver," in that voice she used when she wasn't really thinking about me, only about the convenience I offered. Brian kissed my forehead once, early on, when he came home to find dinner ready. Then gratitude turned into expectation. Soon it wasn't. "Could you fold this if you're not busy?" It was, "Mom, you didn't put the towels away yet?" Not a question. Not even irritation. Just a mild confusion, as though I'd forgotten my job description. I washed dishes before they even cooled. I scrubbed stains off the children's shirts. I mopped floors after sticky juice spills. I shoveled snow so early in the morning the streetlights were still on. And still, Charlotte sighed whenever she opened the fridge. "Did you buy the wrong yogurt again? We don't use that brand of detergent. These apples are too soft." I didn't argue. I wrote down the brands like a schoolgirl copying notes from a teacher who didn't like her very much. Then the envelope started. It was Brian at first. "Mom, I'll pay you back on Friday," he said, holding out a car repair bill. Friday came and went. Then another Friday. Then another. Charlotte asked too, but never directly. Instead, she'd mention school trip fees in my presence, sighing dramatically until I slipped her a 20. "Oh, Louise, you really didn't have to," she'd say. And yet somehow, the money was never returned, and the sighs never stopped. One morning, I found a note taped to my dresser. "Garbage day. Please remember to take out all bins, including recycling. You forgot last week." I hadn't forgotten. I simply hadn't known it was now my responsibility. Still, I did it. Of course I did. I did all of it. Because it felt better than being still. It felt better than watching the life I'd once had fade behind me. Better than remembering the little farm stand Robert and I used to visit on Saturdays, or the way he'd whistle the same off-key tune when he swept the porch. Usefulness kept me from grief. It also made me easy to walk over. The children learned it quickest. Kids always sense where the soft spots are. They'd bring me broken toys, ripped pages, tangled shoelaces. Not once did anyone tell them to say thank you. I didn't mind. Not yet. Not then. The first time I felt something twist inside me was when Charlotte called from the car. "Louise, can you watch the kids? I forgot I had a meeting. They've already eaten. Don't give them sugar. And keep them out of the living room. I just vacuumed." She hung up before I could answer. The children stood in front of me, coats half-zipped, cheeks flushed from the cold. I helped them out of their boots. Heated up some soup. We did puzzles on the floor. When Charlotte came home 2 hours later, she stepped over the toys without looking at me. "You didn't put them in pajamas?" she asked. It wasn't a question. More like a small, practiced disappointment. Something inside me bent that day. Not broke, not yet, but bent like a branch under too much snow. By evening, I was already back to wiping counters, folding blankets, sorting mail. My usefulness was a rhythm, a heartbeat. I didn't know then that one day that same rhythm would be used as proof that I needed supervision. Proof that I was slipping. Proof that I was getting forgetful. Funny, isn't it? A lifetime of remembering everything. And suddenly, I was the one they said couldn't be trusted with a stovetop. They didn't know how closely I watched them, how sharply I remembered every word, how careful I was not to show the pain. They thought they were using me, and they were. But they were also teaching me something, exactly who would not be in my future. It was my granddaughter's birthday when the first real fracture showed. Emma turned 11. The youngest, the quietest. The one who still sat beside me sometimes, brushing the sleeve of my sweater like it gave her comfort. She was born the year Robert died. I used to joke that she brought breath back into the house. But on that particular Saturday, the house was full of guests, and not one person asked if I was coming to the party. The night before, I'd seen Charlotte stringing up decorations in the dining room, pink and gold, all glitter and gloss. I stood in the doorway and asked, "Anything I can do to help?" She barely turned. "Oh, I think we've got it." No eye contact, no warmth, just a closed door behind her voice. I baked a cake anyway. The kind Emma liked, chocolate with strawberry frosting, the way I used to make it when she was small enough to still sit on the counter and lick the spoon. By noon the next day, music filled the house. Laughter, doors swinging open, children's voices in the yard. But no one knocked on my door. No one asked me to join. I waited. I kept thinking, maybe they're just busy. Maybe Brian forgot to remind Charlotte. At 1:15, I opened the door. Just a little. Enough to hear Charlotte laughing in the kitchen with her sister. "I'm so glad we didn't make it awkward with all the extra family," she said. "I thought your mother-in-law lived here," her sister replied. Charlotte snorted. "She does, but she understands. It's just a kid's thing." That was the word that stayed with me. Understands. I stepped back into my little room and closed the door. Quietly, so the latch wouldn't click. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the cake. I had even piped Emma's name across the top in pink letters. The frosting was still soft. At 2, I heard the sound of paper tearing. Presents. At 2:30, I heard a chorus of "Happy Birthday." At 2:35, Laughter again. Someone must have made a joke. I tried to imagine Emma's face. I hoped she was happy. I hoped she wasn't the one who had asked that I stay away. But I didn't know anymore. Children learn what they're shown. At 3, the cake went into the trash. Not out of spite, because I realized it would taste like sorrow by the time I tried to eat it. I didn't cry. I haven't cried in years. That was the one thing I still had control over. Tears are for people who expect kindness. I stopped expecting long ago. Brian came to my room the next day, knocked once, then let himself in without waiting. "Hey, Mom," he said, like nothing had happened. "Emma says thanks for the gift." He didn't mention the cake. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets. "I hope you're not upset you missed the party. It was just so chaotic, and Charlotte thought it'd be easier this way." "Easier," I nodded. "Of course. I understand." There it was again. Understands. Their favorite word for me. Short for, she won't argue, she won't ask questions, she won't make trouble, and maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe I would have let it pass, just like everything else. But that was the same week I found the brochure on the kitchen counter. Golden Pines Memory Residence, Gentle Transitions for Seniors. There was a handwritten note clipped to the corner. Might be a good option if things keep going the way they are. I didn't touch it. Didn't move it. Didn't need to ask who had written it. That night I sat by the window again. Not because I was sad, but because something old and solid inside me was beginning to wake up. Something they'd mistaken for weakness. And I began to think, what would Robert say? He would have said, "You don't have to prove your worth to anyone who refuses to see it." I slept well that night. First time in weeks. And I knew the time for silence was almost over. There's a kind of silence between people that doesn't come from lack of words. It comes from too many of the wrong ones left unsaid. Brian started avoiding eye contact. He still came home from work, still gave Charlotte the usual kiss on the cheek, still nodded at me if we crossed paths in the hallway. But that was it. No real conversation. No warmth. Just a man slipping away from the woman who used to hold his whole world together. Sometimes I watched him when he didn't know I was there. It's strange, seeing your child become someone you can no longer read. His shoulders hunched more now. His smile thinned around people he didn't like. He was still my son, but not the boy who used to fall asleep on my lap with jelly on his fingers and whisper, "Don't tell Dad I cried at the movie." No, that boy was long gone. I began to notice how carefully Charlotte watched me now. Her friendliness had turned brittle. "Do you need anything?" she'd ask with a sweet voice, but her eyes scanned my face as if searching for cracks, as if she were waiting for the moment I finally slipped. Dropped a name. Forgot a word. Missed a step. She asked once, too casually, what day it was. I told her it was Thursday. She smiled like she'd caught a fish. "It's Wednesday," she said, and turned away. I hadn't forgotten. I'd just misspoken. But to Charlotte, that was enough to file in the drawer labeled evidence. They were watching me, not with care, with calculation. I stopped eating dinner with them altogether. Not that I was invited anymore, but even the moments when I'd quietly join at the table, they faded. Charlotte started setting only 4 places. 1 for her, 1 for Brian, 2 for the children. I got the message, so I ate early, alone, a piece of toast, soup from a can, a banana, soft and spotted. Sometimes I could hear them through the walls, talking like I wasn't there. She left the cabinet open again. She put her shoes in the wrong place. I don't think she's taking her pills properly. Brian never disagreed, not once. Sometimes he didn't even respond. But the worst of it, the sharpest little cut, came late one evening. I had gotten up to get water. The hallway was dark. I moved quietly, as always. I don't know what made me pause outside the kitchen. Maybe the flicker of their voices, low and serious. Maybe something in the way Charlotte whispered. "She's slipping," she said. "You see it too, don't you?" Brian didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing. Then, quietly, not cruelly, just tiredly, he said, "She'll forget everything soon." A pause. Then Charlotte laughed. "Well, let's just hope it happens before Christmas." I didn't move, didn't gasp, didn't cry. I stood there, mug in hand, and let those words wash over me. She'll forget everything soon. I suppose they thought that made it safer, that they could say what they wanted, that I was already halfway gone. They were wrong. I remembered the exact shade of Charlotte's lipstick that day. Red. Too bright for her skin. I remembered the way Brian stirred his tea counterclockwise, like he always had since he was a teenager. I remembered the hum of the fridge behind them and the faint click of the porch light when it flicked on outside. I remembered everything. Back in my room, I sat down slowly. My knees ached from standing too long. I placed the mug on the table. Didn't drink. Just stared at my hands, the same hands that had once buttoned Brian's school shirts and peeled apples for his lunch. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair until dawn, listening to the house breathe around me. And I decided, enough. I might have let them take my space, my time, my silence. But they would not take my memory. And they would not take my name off the things I had built. The mug was still warm in my hand when I heard it. Not the first part, not Charlotte's complaints, not even the little sighs Brian made when she started in on me. I was used to that soundtrack by now, used to hearing them when they thought I was asleep, used to pretending I hadn't. But this time, I stood too close. Just outside the kitchen where the light spilled in a triangle across the hallway rug, and something about the tone made me pause. "She's slipping," Charlotte said. "It's getting worse." Brian exhaled. "I know. I mean, look at this morning. She asked if the laundry was dry. It was sitting in the basket, Brian. She already folded it." Charlotte laughed, but it was tight, brittle. "She's not tracking anymore." There was a pause, then his voice, soft, careful, not cruel, but final. "She'll forget everything soon." Not maybe, not I'm worried. Just a statement, like he was reading the weather forecast. Charlotte's voice dropped too. "Well, let's hope it's before Christmas. I can't do another holiday pretending she's still—" She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I stepped back slowly, pressing myself against the hallway wall. I felt the wood grain through my sweater, felt the crack in the baseboard beneath my heel, felt something in me go still. It wasn't shock. It was a kind of quiet confirmation. They were waiting for me to vanish, not from the house. I was already halfway out of that, but from myself. Forget everything. That's what they thought. That my mind was already dissolving like sugar in tea. And why wouldn't they believe that? I'd been too quiet, too agreeable. I'd smiled when they erased me from the table. I'd nodded when they said I must be tired, must be confused, must be careful. I'd accepted the small cruelties, the closing doors, the patronizing glances. But I wasn't confused. And I wasn't tired. I was watching, remembering. And in that moment, pressed against the hallway wall in a house I helped pay for, I made a decision. I turned and walked slowly back to my room. Not quietly, not sneaking. I let my footsteps sound. If they heard me, they didn't say a word. Inside my room, I sat down at the small table by the window, the one with the single drawer. I opened it and pulled out the folder I hadn't touched in years. Tan cardstock. My name written in Robert's handwriting across the top. He always labeled things neatly. Inside, my old will, the one we wrote together. Brian's name circled, the house, the accounts, the savings, all of it to him. At the time, it made sense. He was the only child. He had a family. Robert had said, "It's the right thing." And I believed that. Back when Brian still looked me in the eye, back when Charlotte still brought me tea in the afternoons and called me Lou. I closed the folder. Then I opened the drawer below and pulled out the black notebook, the one I used only for serious things, not recipes, not grocery lists, decisions. I wrote 4 lines: call attorney, new will, remove Brian, add Joanna, tomorrow. Then I underlined it. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. Like a window had been opened in a stuffy room. They thought I was fading. They thought my silence was decline. They forgot who raised that roof over their heads. They forgot who taught Brian to tie his shoes and sign his name. They forgot me. But I hadn't forgotten a single thing. I didn't turn on the light that night. I didn't need to see the room to know where everything was. The walls creaked in familiar places. The small heater let out a soft hiss. My slippers were by the foot of the bed, just slightly askew, the way Robert used to leave his when he got up too fast. I sat by the window in the dark and listened to the house breathe. Brian's laugh drifted down the hall. Charlotte said something I couldn't make out, but her voice was light, relaxed. They had already moved on from what they'd said. Probably assumed I hadn't heard, or worse, assumed I wouldn't remember even if I had. She'll forget everything soon. No, I wouldn't. I remembered the way Charlotte's voice twisted when she said extra family. I remembered how Brian started calling me Mom only when the children were around. I remembered every time they used the word confused instead of ignored and tired instead of excluded. But more than anything, I remembered who I was. Not a burden, not an afterthought, not a woman waiting to be managed. I was Louise Helen Grafton, born in 1949, daughter of Nora and James, wife of Robert for 41 years, mother to a boy who once brought me wildflowers, grandmother to a girl who still held my hand like it meant something, and I wasn't going to let that name, that life, be rewritten behind my back. At midnight, I made tea, silently, slowly. No clinks, no lights, just steam rising from the cup and the quiet rhythm of my breathing. I brought out my notebook again, wrote one more line: I will not disappear quietly. Then I pulled out the envelope from the small lockbox at the back of my dresser, the one that held the contact card for Mr. Penn, our old lawyer. Robert trusted him. So did I. He was retired now, mostly, but last year he sent me a Christmas card, said if I ever needed anything, to call. At 12:15, I dialed the number on the back of the card. It rang once, twice, then a click. A groggy voice answered, Penn residence. Thomas, I said softly. It's Louise Grafton. A pause, then a rustle. Louise, are you all right? I need a new will, I said, quietly, as soon as possible. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. The way people don't ask why when they hear a storm's already hit the windows. I'll clear the afternoon tomorrow, he said. Come to my house. Bring what you need. I thanked him. Then I hung up and stared at the window again. It was raining now, a soft, steady tap against the glass. I didn't sleep, but I wasn't tired. At 4 a.m, I packed a small bag, my notebook, the folder, the old will. I added Robert's watch, Joanna's last birthday drawing, and the deed to the house. At 5:30, the sky began to lighten. I changed into my good coat, The one Charlotte once said was a bit much for someone who doesn't go anywhere anymore. I went somewhere that day. I went to reclaim my name, my choices, my power. And not a soul in that house even noticed the door open and close behind me. The taxi smelled like peppermint and old upholstery. The driver didn't speak, and I was grateful for it. I wasn't in the mood for small talk or stories about the weather. I kept my hands folded over the folder in my lap, like I was protecting something delicate. We pulled up to a small brick house on the edge of town. Not a law office, a home. Mr. Penn had retired 3 years ago, but he still kept his mind sharp, still helped people he trusted. He used to say, "Law isn't about money, Louise. It's about leaving things the right way." He met me at the door in a cardigan, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Louise," he said warmly, "come in. I've made coffee." I followed him into a small sunroom where a pot brewed quietly, and the table was already set with a yellow legal pad, 2 pens, and a small dish of sugar cookies. The room smelled like lemon polish and thyme. I sat down carefully, setting the folder between us. "I didn't think I'd be rewriting this," I said. "Not this late." He smiled gently. "It's never too late to protect what matters." We talked for 2 hours. I told him everything. Not the petty details, not the yogurt brands or the hallway whispers, but the truth. The way I had faded from my own life. The way my silence had become their permission. Mr. Penn didn't interrupt. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" He just took notes, nodded slowly, and asked clear, sharp questions. "Still intend to exclude Brian entirely?" "Yes." "And the assets? You want to move them into a trust?" "Yes. For Joanna, not to be touched by anyone else until she turns 30. With provisions in place if anything happens to me sooner." "Very well." He flipped to a clean page. "Do you want to leave Brian a letter?" I paused. No. Because anything I wrote would sound like bitterness. And this wasn't about bitterness. It was about clarity. About the quiet sound of a door being closed. Gently, but finally. He drafted the new document while I watched the sun inch across the floorboards. I could hear a clock ticking somewhere in the next room, and I imagined Robert sitting here beside me, hand over mine, saying, "Good. Good, Lou." By noon, it was done. He read it aloud, carefully, sentence by sentence. I signed. He signed. And then it was real. Just like that. I had taken myself back. Before I left, I pulled out an old envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was the check Robert and I had written years ago for Brian's college tuition. I kept it as a copy, a reminder. "I want this scanned and attached to the file," I said. "So when they ask why, there's a record." He nodded, eyes solemn. "You're not the first parent to do this, Louise, but you're one of the few who won't regret it." Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves scattered across the porch. I pulled my coat tighter and thanked him. He squeezed my hand. "You've done right," he said. As the taxi pulled away, I didn't look back. Not at his house, not at the road home. Because it wasn't home anymore. Home is where you are seen, where your name is still spoken with care, where you're not just understood, but remembered. And now, for the first time in years, I had chosen to remember myself. Joanna showed up on a Thursday. No warning, no text. Just a soft knock on my door around 4 in the afternoon, the way she used to knock when she was 7, and still believed that manners were magic. I opened the door, and there she was. Taller, sharper at the edges now, 17 and halfway into her own life. But her eyes were still mine, green, like Robert's, with that steady gaze that never flinched. "Hi, Grandma," she said. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone used that word without strain. Come in, I said, stepping back. She glanced around the room, taking it in. The same narrow bed, the small table, the chipped mug. She didn't comment on any of it, just walked over to the chair and sat like she belonged there. Mom said you've been quiet lately. I smiled. Is that so? She also said you might be getting overwhelmed. That made me laugh, not loud, just a short breath, like a thread pulled through old fabric. Joanna looked at me then. Really looked. You're not overwhelmed, are you? No, I said. Just tired of playing small. She didn't flinch. Just nodded once, like she understood more than anyone else in that house ever had. I brought you something, she said, reaching into her backpack. She handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing, pencil and ink, of the porch swing. Our porch swing, the one they'd locked behind a keypad. It's from memory, she said. I missed it. My throat tightened. I traced the lines of the drawing with my finger. She'd drawn every slat, every bolt, even the tiny crack on the left armrest. It's beautiful, I said. I didn't want you to forget it. She didn't say it with drama, no sentiment, just fact. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold, strong, ink-stained. Joanna, I said quietly, I've made some decisions about the future. She turned to me. I figured. I raised an eyebrow. She smiled. You're sitting straighter. You only do that when you've made up your mind. Smart girl. I want you to know something, I said. No matter what anyone says later, no matter how they frame it. What I've done with a clear mind. With full understanding. She didn't interrupt, just waited. I've changed my will. She nodded slowly. I left everything to you, but not just to give. To protect. Her face shifted, not with greed, not even surprise, but with a kind of weight, like she knew this wasn't a gift. It was a responsibility. Why me? She asked. Because you still see me, I said. Because when I speak, you listen. Because when I disappear from a room, you notice. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. You think I'll lose that? No, I said. I think the world will try to take it from you, but you'll fight for it. And I want to give you something worth fighting for. She hugged me then. Not tightly, not like a child clinging to warmth, but like a woman holding another woman upright. We sat there a long time, no clock ticking loud enough to matter. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was part of something again. Not a guest in someone else's story, but a root, a memory, a name that wouldn't fade. It started with Charlotte's voice. Too sweet. That's how I knew. One morning, she appeared in my doorway, tray in hand. Toast, jam, a cup of tea I hadn't asked for. She even folded the napkin into a triangle like they do in hotels. Just thought you might want a quiet breakfast today, she said, eyes wide, tone light. I almost smiled. Almost. Thank you, I said, reaching for the tea. She lingered, watching, waiting. Then, too casually. Everything all right lately? You've seemed distant. I met her gaze. Sometimes distance is peace. She blinked, then looked down, as if the tray had become suddenly interesting. Later that day, Brian came in with a stack of mail, something he hadn't done in months. Hey, Mom, he said too loudly. Got your pension letter here. Oh, and your bank statement. He placed them carefully on the table, like offerings. You need help reviewing anything? Or maybe setting up automatic transfers? We could take that off your plate. Off my plate. It was almost funny, the way they softened once they sensed something had shifted. Like animals who smelled a coming storm, but couldn't tell which direction it would blow. They didn't know yet. but they suspected. Charlotte started making a point to include me in conversations, asked if I wanted to join them for dinner, even offered to teach me how to use her new tablet, as if my worth was measured by how well I navigated apps. Brian brought flowers once, from a gas station. They wilted before the week was out. One afternoon, I caught them in the kitchen, whispering. "I'm telling you, something's off," Charlotte said. "She's too quiet. She's hiding something." "I don't think so," Brian muttered. "She's just moody." "Moody? Brian, she's never closed her door this much. She's never refused the kids' drawings." I hadn't refused. I'd simply stopped pretending they're stick figure scribbles, offered like guilt-soaked apologies, meant anything when they were followed by silence and closed doors. They were circling me now, like people trying to read a locked diary, as if they deserved the story inside. And then it happened. A call from Mr. Penn's assistant. She had been polite, but brief. Said someone had contacted their office asking if Louise Grafton's legal status was up to date. "They wouldn't give a name," she said, "but it's safe to assume someone in your household's getting nervous." I thanked her, hung up, sat still for a long time. So they knew, or guessed, and suddenly the performance began. I became Mom again, then Mommy once, which made my skin crawl. Brian offered to drive me to appointments. Charlotte asked if I wanted to help redecorate the kitchen. The children were instructed, I could tell, to bring me little notes, drawings, bits of affection I hadn't seen in months. I accepted them all, with a smile, but never with my guard down, because it was all too late. You don't undrop a plate once it's shattered. You don't unhear your child wish you would forget your own name. I wasn't angry. Just done. One evening, Charlotte knocked on my door holding a photo album. "I thought you might like to look at these together," she said, flipping it open without waiting for my answer. There were pictures of Brian as a child, me, younger, Robert, mid-laugh, Joanna, still in diapers. "Families change," she said softly. "But the love stays, don't you think?" I looked at her for a long time. "I think," I said, "that love doesn't vanish. It's just that some people stop looking for it in the same places." She smiled too brightly. "That's very wise." "No," I said, "it's very lived." She closed the album. We both knew what was happening. They were trying to pull me back in, to wrap a bow around the mess and hope I wouldn't tug at the knots. But I had already tugged, already unwrapped the truth, already written the last chapter, and they weren't in it the way they expected. Brian waited until the house was quiet. That's how I knew something was coming. It was late, past 10, when he knocked, just once. Not the hurried knock of a man in a rush, not the polite one either. Just a slow, deliberate sound, like a judge entering a room he already owns. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded, even though he'd already stepped inside. He didn't sit, just hovered by the edge of the dresser, hands in his pockets, pretending to scan the bookshelf, like he couldn't bear to look at me directly. "I wanted to talk," he said. I waited. "I feel like things have been strained." Still, I waited. He sighed. "Look, I know we haven't always gotten everything right. Charlotte can be intense, and I've been busy, distracted." I stayed silent. "But you're still Mom. You're still family, and I think we've let that get a little lost, especially lately." There it was, the setup. He cleared his throat, finally looking at me. "I heard you've been talking to Mr. Penn." Straight to it. "I have," I said. He nodded. "He's a good man, but he's old. He might not be thinking as clearly as he used to." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so transparent. The irony of hearing those words from the same man who'd let his wife whisper that I was slipping. "I think he's thinking just fine," I said. Brian stepped closer. "Look, if this is about feeling left out, we can fix that. I mean, if you're updating things, we'd just appreciate being in the loop." I folded my hands in my lap, calm, steady. "In the loop?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, I mean, these decisions affect all of us." I tilted my head slightly. "Do they?" He blinked. "Well, yeah. I mean, the house, the finances. If things get complicated later, it'll fall on us to figure everything out." There it was. The fear behind the softness. Not grief. Not regret. Just logistics. "I'm not planning to die next week, Brian." "I didn't say that." "No, but you're already organizing the cleanup." He flinched a little. Just barely. Then he sighed and tried another route. "I just don't want you to make decisions based on temporary feelings. I know you've been under a lot of stress. Sometimes that clouds things." I met his gaze fully now. "What exactly do you think I've done?" He looked down. "Just rumors. Charlotte said maybe there were changes. Legal ones. And if you're feeling pressured, or I'm not." He shifted on his feet. Okay, good. I just want to make sure we're all protected." "Who is we, Brian?" He paused. I let the silence stretch. Finally, he muttered, "You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean," I said. "And I think you're right. Protection is important. That's why I did what I did." His mouth opened slightly, closed again. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. My voice didn't rise. It never had to. "I gave you everything once. Quietly, without question. Because I believed you would protect what mattered. But I've watched how you treat things you think are permanent." He stepped back. "You and Charlotte built a life with my money and walled me out of it. You used my silence to justify your indifference. You mistook my stillness for decay. Mom, that's not fair. It's not supposed to be fair. It's supposed to be clear." He stood there, uncertain for the first time in years. Then, as if remembering something rehearsed, he added quietly, "You know, if this gets messy, Charlotte might bring up concerns. About your memory, about whether you've been making decisions fully, aware." A beat passed. I smiled slowly. "Good. Let her." He blinked. "Because if she does, she'll have to explain why she left me alone with the children for hours. Why I was trusted with passwords, keys, even emergency contacts. Why no doctor has ever recorded a single note of concern." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "I may be many things, Brian, but I am not confused." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he turned toward the door. "I just hope you know what you're doing." I stood. "I do. For the first time in years." He left without another word, and when the door clicked shut behind him, I stood alone in the room that had never been mine, and felt for once entirely in control. The next morning, I packed my bags, not in anger, not in haste, just quietly, piece by piece, folding my life into the same suitcase I'd brought here 2 years ago, the same one Charlotte once called too large for such a short stay. Stay. That word always sat wrong in my mouth. I hadn't stayed. I'd shrunk. I'd been folded into the edges of a house I helped pay for, tiptoeing around a family that had once grown inside me, now treating me like something temporary. But not anymore. I placed my notebook on top of my folded sweaters, slid the drawing Joanna gave me between 2 layers of clothes, careful not to crease the paper, packed the photo of Robert last, the fishing one. His smile always looked like it knew something before everyone else did. Outside, the house moved in its usual rhythm. Doors opened. Water ran. Charlotte's heels tapped against the hardwood, fast and sharp, like thoughts she didn't say aloud. The children murmured to each other in the kitchen, voices lower when they passed by my door. No one knocked. I didn't expect them to. Brian left for work without speaking to me. I heard the car start, the driveway crunching under the tires. It didn't hurt. Not anymore. Charlotte passed by my room around 10. Paused. She stood in the doorway, eyes catching on the open suitcase. Her lips pressed into a line. "You're going somewhere?" "Yes." "For how long?" "I haven't decided." She lingered. "Do you want me to help with anything?" I looked up at her. "No. I think we're both better when I handle my own things." She said nothing, just nodded once and stepped away. By noon, the house was quiet again. I sat on the edge of the bed, one last time, and looked around. There wasn't much to leave behind. An old mug, a chair they'd chosen, the dresser that had never held anything more than temporary clothes. All the good parts of me had already been pulled back in, reclaimed, tucked into the folds of memory where they belonged. I took one last look at the room. At the space where I'd waited to be seen. At the walls that had overheard too much. Then I picked up my bag and stepped out. The children were in the living room. Emma looked up first. "Grandma?" "I'm going on a little trip," I said. "For how long?" she asked. I bent down, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "For as long as I need." Joanna stood behind her, watching. She didn't ask anything. She just nodded. Once, firmly. Like she understood everything I hadn't said. And then she did something that nearly undid me. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded scrap of paper, and pressed it into my hand. "I drew you a new porch," she said. "For wherever you go." I kissed her forehead. "You are the best part of this family." Charlotte watched from the kitchen. I didn't go to her. There was nothing left to say that she hadn't already chosen not to hear. At the door, I paused, turned once, took in the house that had taught me, in its silence, how much a woman could endure before she stood. Then I stepped outside. The sun was mild, the street quiet. My taxi pulled up just as I reached the gate. The driver opened the door. "Louise?" "That's me." As we drove away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I carried everything worth keeping in my bag and in my bones. I didn't go far that day. Just 3 towns over, to a quiet street lined with old maples and houses that looked like they'd been built by hands that cared. Joanna had told me once that her best friend's grandmother lived here. A calm place, she'd called it. I remembered that. I remember everything they think I don't. The taxi stopped at a small 2-story boarding house with green shutters and a porch swing that actually moved when the breeze touched it. A real swing. No keypad, no rules, no understands. The owner, a woman named Marcy, opened the door before I knocked. She was in her 60s, silver hair pinned back, eyes bright. "You must be Louise," she said. "Your room's ready." I didn't remember booking it, but then I didn't need to. Joanna had done it for me. Slipped the confirmation email into my inbox while helping me fix the Wi-Fi last week. Clever girl. Marcy showed me to a room at the back of the house. Sunlight spilled through the window, warm on the wooden floor. The bedspread was soft blue, the color of quiet mornings and clean pages. There was a dresser, a small desk, a chair with arms wide enough for resting, and a window that opened without a creak. I set my suitcase down but didn't unpack. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself breathe. Really breathe. No footsteps upstairs, no doors slamming, no voices deciding who I was when I wasn't listening. Just air, light. A stillness that felt like the beginning of something, not the end. After an hour, I walked downstairs. The whole house smelled of cinnamon and something baking. "Coffee cake," Marcy said, pulling a tray from the oven. "Help yourself. First slice is always best." I thanked her, sat at the small table by the window, and realized that for the first time in years, every bite tasted like food, not tension. Later, I stepped outside and sat on the porch swing. It moved gently, carrying me back and forth. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't erase you, but makes room for you. And there, on that swing, I finally let myself feel tired. Not the heavy, defeated kind of tired that comes from being unseen. No, the good kind. The kind that follows a long journey when you know you've reached the place where you can finally put the weight down. I stayed like that a long while before taking out my notebook. The black one. The one with the list. I crossed out the last line. "I will not disappear quietly." Done. Then I wrote, "I didn't disappear. I stepped out." A car drove by. Children's laughter drifted from somewhere down the block. A dog barked twice, then settled. Life was going on around me, not without me, but simply beside me, leaving me room to walk at my own pace. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed. Brian, then Charlotte, then Brian again. 2 missed calls. 1 message. "Mom, please call. We need to talk. It looks like you changed something. We're worried." Worried. The word sat there on the screen, empty as a cracked bowl. I didn't call back. Instead, I sent 1 message. 8 simple words. "I've made my decisions. Please respect them." Within minutes, another message appeared. "This isn't final. We can fix whatever you're upset about." I didn't respond. There was nothing left in me that wanted repair from people who had spent years pretending I was a loose thread. Near evening, Joanna called, not with panic, not with fear. "Grandma, are you safe?" "I am," I said. "More than they know." "Good," she whispered. "Dad's frantic. Charlotte's pacing. They're acting like you're the one who disappeared." "I didn't disappear," I said softly. "I just stopped waiting to be seen." She exhaled, and I could hear the smile in her breath. "When can I visit?" she asked. "Anytime you want," I said. "My porch has room for 2. After we hung up, I sat outside again. The sun was lowering behind the trees, turning the air gold and warm. I thought of Robert. Of the long drive we took once, when he told me, "Dignity isn't given, Lou. It's kept." I kept mine. It took a while, longer than it should have, but I kept it. And now, as the evening settled softly over the porch, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. A release, quiet and firm, like the last knot finally coming undone. This wasn't revenge, not really. This was remembrance. Of myself, of my name, of the truth they tried to rewrite behind closed doors. I hadn't forgotten a single thing. And I wasn't going to start now. If you've ever been pushed aside, or spoken over, or treated like you were fading when you were simply quiet, then you know exactly what this story is.